Welcome to Manager Tools. Creating Organizational Hiring Criteria, Part 3. This cast answers these questions. How can I shape my organization's hiring strategy? How do I decide what questions to ask of a candidate? How do I connect what my organization needs with our hiring process? Well, if you want answers to these questions and more, keep listening. Here we go.
Some of us learn by watching and some of us by reading. That's why the Effective Manager and the Effective Hiring Manager exist in book form. If you prefer to read, dog-ear pages, and make notes, you can purchase an ebook or a hardback book version. If you're the listening type, both books are available as audiobooks too. No matter how you prefer to learn, you can be a more effective manager and hire better quality directs. Find out more by going to managertools.com and look for products in the menu.
Well, welcome, folks. If you haven't listened to our first two parts, I would suggest you do so before going on this one. It'll make a lot more sense. And we've already talked about kind of the organization hiring criteria, and we had 4 parts. We talked about decide what you're looking for. We've already talked about deciding what questions will get answers to expose those things you're looking for. And now we're going to talk about, I think it's really the key part here.
Well, it is, but nobody knows about it and nobody does it. And then the last piece is capturing, communicating, which everybody.
Well, here's where there's a lot of power, right? This can really distinguish you from everybody else that interviews. And that's decide what answers will show evidence of it ahead of time.
Yeah. And to me, this is a problem for so many of us because of this ongoing belief among so many managers. I wouldn't be surprised if it's high as 75, 85%. I mean, in fact, I would even say anecdotally, I'm not sure I meet 1 out of 100 managers who doesn't feel this way, that there are other managers who know what they're doing. And not only that they're good at it, but they know what they're supposed to be doing and they're doing it. Mm-hmm. Now, some of that is a belief that everybody else has equanimity and you don't. But it goes further. Some people believe that manager, because she looks fairly calm and so on, that she not only knows what she's supposed to be doing, that she's been taught the right way, but that she feels good about it. And she has no worries at all that she's not doing it the right way. Well, look, if you're a manager and you live your life with these thoughts in your head, you know, I used to get angry about it. Now I realize if you're walking around thinking that about everybody else, you start to believe that, yeah, they must have the right answer. They know it's him. Oh, her. Yeah, he knows. I'm the one that doesn't.
Right. Even worse, they believe some people are born with it, right?
Yeah, I don't think this is a pure case of imposter syndrome, which I don't really love. The psychologist's idea that, you know, I've achieved this level, but I really don't deserve it. I think we call that insecurity as opposed to some syndrome that will have a spectrum and so on. But it wouldn't shock me that a manager who thought those thoughts would start being hesitant to implement his or her new initiative, a la Willow not guessing his own finger or thumb in the movie Willow. And so you end up with people who are reasonably smart. Were they to, you know, choose to do something different and say, no, that's not the way I do it. I do it this way, that they would get great results. But we talk ourselves out of it. And now I will also say this, in the case of deciding about the answers you're going to get to questions, it's a slightly different situation because there's at least a majority of managers who do not even think that the purpose of creating questions is to also create a template, an idea, a framework for evaluating answers, right? But think about it. If you think about interviewing as a sort of an interesting form of a test, well, what teacher gives a test without some framework? Even if you're in, you know, modern literature, right? There's still some framework that the professor uses to grade your test.
To evaluate the answer?
Yeah. So look, what we've done is we've said, okay, here are the things I'm looking for. Okay. Now, I didn't really say it this way, but you know, those are ideas. Things like mission first, people always, or, you know, the other one I use is Hewitt's great one, Swans, smarts, work hard, ambitious, nice. And by the way, folks, if you don't have something in there about nice, it's going to bite you. And you need to prepare people for that. If you don't have something in there, and you can use a long, fancy, politically correct word if you want, but if you don't have in your principles results, and you don't have in your principles niceness of some form, that's probably, I think that's a word, but there's probably a better one. Don't be surprised when you don't get it. Okay. So you decide on those ideas. And by the way, a lot of people think that's fun. Ooh, let's talk about the kind of person we want. Although we're certainly not going to create personas. We don't want that. Then it makes sense. People go, okay, let's come up with questions. The reason why the questions are important is when you think about the process of choosing who gets in and who doesn't, questions are your ultimate tools. They're like the screwdriver and the hammer and the pliers in your toolbox. They're absolutely, if you look at the process, yes, screening matters. Yes, everything matters. But at some point, you're going to have to ask questions. And by the very definition, questions imply answers. And the purpose of the question, let's be clear, it's not, the purpose of the question is not in the question. The purpose of the question is in the answer. Mm-hmm. Questions are about eliciting answers. It's answers we need to evaluate. But because managers, a lot of us, we're never taught this is how you do it. This is how it works. I mean, it wouldn't be hard. It's a week-long class that every company ought to be teaching their managers, all with their own flavor. Here are the rules. In fact, Mike, you and I should create it. We should put it all together and say, by the way, we'll come and do this for every group of new managers. Years ago, I did it at a huge company. I was responsible for all what amounted to new manager orientation. We called it NEMO. And every person who got promoted went through new manager orientation. Here are the rules. Here are the things you can do. Here are the things you can't do. There was a legal person that came, an HR person that came, and then we taught basic management stuff. But nobody gets that. Doesn't exist almost anywhere. If it does exist where you are, folks, feel free to write in and tell us about it. We'd love to hear about it.
It used to. It used to.
Yeah, it didn't used to widely, though.
Yeah, that's right. Maybe I was fortunate.
Yeah, right? Yeah. So what you're supposed to do when you start thinking about interviewing, I mean, most managers don't understand that the only reason you create questions is to create criteria against which to answer the questions. It's about the answers. It's not about the questions. But if you don't know any questions to ask, other than ones you have been asked, good and bad, there's a whole spectrum. If you go through 10 different interviews, you get the full spectrum. You get really good and you get crap. And most people are pretty well able to tell the pretty good from the not so good and the horrible. Although a good example of most of us is lack of ability to understand questions and answers. There are still people out there in the world that believe there are such things as illegal questions. I caveat this by saying there are some municipalities in the United States who have been stupid enough to say asking the question is illegal, which is just morally offensive. But there are no illegal questions. If somebody asks you a question that appears to be discriminatory, as our guidance says in Career Tools, you should answer it. And then, by the way, you should decide that any company that asks questions like that, you wouldn't want to go to work for. And if you feel so inclined, you should say something to somebody about it. But the question itself is not illegal. Using the answer to the question to discriminate in hiring on the basis of protected classes and various other things is illegal. So it is not the question. It is the use of the answer that is objectionable, problematic, disgusting.
Yeah, and if you're a manager that think that's appropriate, then just stop listening right now. Just stop.
Yeah. So my point is, if you're not knowledgeable about interviewing, first of all, it's okay. And your company hasn't trained you. And you know what? That's okay too. It's not going to happen overnight. The next thing, though, is if you don't know how to interview, the things that you glom onto are the questions. I know I did years ago. And then after you've done 500 interviews, you discover it's not the questions that matter. It's the answers. And so when we talked about questions last time and developing questions and simple behavioral interview questions and so on, we were touching on what everybody knows is important. But, you know, the Eagles song, Everybody Knows, is basically trying to tell you that no, everybody doesn't know, because really what's important is the answers. Now, creating criteria, frameworks, boundary conditions for the answers you're looking for is the hardest step in all of this. And frankly, I would argue for many of you, particularly if I go back to my point about the managers out there who believe that everybody else knows what they're doing except you. Trust me, dude, it's not true. You're doing fine. And they're not all knowing and all seeing. You could leave this step out. I know sometimes our guidance seems overwhelming. We make it fairly straightforward in terms of the steps you need to take, and we don't think it would take that much time. But if you wanted to simply be clear about whom you're looking for, and then create questions that you think will elicit answers that will show you some things in that area, and then trust your people, and then last step, capture and communicate the results, you'd be totally fine with me, okay? And you may want to do it after 6 months. Okay, 6 months, we've been doing questions. We identified our guys and gals. We got good questions. Now let's have some raw material in the form of answers. Which answers, now listen carefully, which answers really shone through? I like this guy's answer. I like that guy's answer. But let's go a step further. Do we believe that answer gave us information which was justified relative to the decision? In other words, for those people that we thought met our criteria to be a swan, for instance, again, tip of the hat to Hewitt, then are they now here and are they now swans? Right? In other words, it's one thing to have question and answer and to be able to evaluate answers. But if you evaluate an answer as this young lady is absolutely outstanding and someday I'll work for her, and then 6 months to a year later, she didn't work out so well. Okay. We need some adjustment in there.
Yeah, exactly. How do we prevent this in the future?
Yeah. In fact, our friend John Baston did that very thing. And I've told him, I'm way delayed on getting back to him. I've told him I'd really like to do either a long form podcast where we talk about the process he went through for his organization to determine, okay, how good are we at picking people? Because we have data. And this is another case where I bump up against HR because Mike will love me saying this because I'm a stupid non-deck guy. I'm like,
are you sure about that?
Do we have the data? Do we have the data? And Mike goes, yeah. I'm like, okay, can I see it? Well, it's in the system. We can't, we have to write SQL queries and everything. And so it'll take a while. Well, the problem in organizations is not SQL queries. The problem in organizations is HR. They say, well, no, you'd have to, that would require a VP's approval for you to be able to look at all the data we have on hiring. And I'll tell you one of the reasons why that's so. One of the big things that in a big organization, HR is the HR people, the recruiters, they're measured on time between contact and hire. Unfortunately, that might be of benefit to you, but you wonder how many other measures there are. And another thing they're measured on is offers to acceptances. But I don't know that many organizations that are measured on acceptances versus performance. And to me, that makes the art of hiring really more of a science, which leaves a lot of it out of it. And it also makes it transactional. But folks, if you're a manager, you don't want hiring to be transactional. Okay, I can understand why HR, particularly if they're given those measures, would want to push people through and make the decision and so on. And I'm not saying there aren't many, many great organizations with fantastic HR organizations that are completely partnered, and I kiss your feet for it because you're rare and you're wonderful and we love you. But too many HR organizations see that as a transaction, but you're the one that's left holding the bag. And in too many cases, it gets close to the line from Margin Call. The most odious bag of excrement, I think, is the line by Jeremy Irons. So again, if you want to pause and not do this step and simply agree on who you're looking for and agree on the kinds of questions that you think will elicit those kinds of answers, and then communicate to everyone so that everyone understands, that's okay. I've done this for clients, this process. We're talking about it at the 30,000 foot level here, folks, but I've done this before, and people have said, no, we're not going to do that. And I said, well, look, why don't I come back in 6 months and I'll gather up everything and I'll go through it and I'll tell you. And unfortunately, in a couple of cases, I had to come back in 6 months and discover that, about 50% of our managers take notes in their interviews. They asked me, like, what should we be shooting for the percentage of managers that
Take notes.
I'll forget this. What you should be shooting for is the managers who don't take notes. And they're like, what do you mean? I said, well, if you're talking about shooting, no.
Oh, my Lord.
Yeah, no, you can't, dude, you can't conduct an interview without taking notes. You are not that person. You're not. Okay. And again, if you wait, you get some raw data to be able to compare good answers to bad answers based on whom you've hired and whom you've chosen not to hire. Okay. But let's give an example regarding communication. Someone who says in an interview, regarding communication. Now, this is a question regarding communication. Well, I talk to everyone and I keep everyone updated. That isn't enough to qualify as a strong communicator, but an unprepared interviewer might think it is. And they would say, yes, she qualifies as a good communicator, or a proactive communicator, an assertive communicator, whatever your company decides. And then you discover, gee, we graded this person as good, but then she comes in here and everybody complains all the time that she just does not communicate. Okay? So it takes some tuning. Someone who says, I send lots of email updates may be showing, I use the term may loosely to imply, oh my gosh, is it true? May be showing a communication weakness by not realizing that different media mean different things and are called for in different measures, in different circumstances, and with different recipients. Holy moly. That's the thing about email. Everybody who doesn't want to work hard on communication because they're not naturally people persons. I'm not saying you're anti-people, folks. If you're a D or a C and you're on the left side of the Dick circle, you tend to be more task-oriented, more logical, linear, factual, rational. You're not into warm hugs, right? You're not an Olaf fan. Oh, everybody's an Olaf fan. What am I saying?
In the high seas, don't even know who Olaf is. And I'd be one of them.
Yes, they do. No.
Oh, yeah.
He's the snowman in Frozen.
Oh.
You don't know Olaf?
Now I know who you're talking about. But then again, I don't remember names, right? Because I'm a high.
There
names
you go.
mean nothing.
Okay.
Now, when you said snowman, now I know his position in the movie, and now I'm good.
Yeah, I mean, as a transformative character, one of the greatest Disney characters of all time.
Yeah, okay.
Dude, don't say it like that. I mean, it's known. It's a factual thing. I can prove it. Okay, some people are not communicators, and the high Ds and high Cs often are that way. The high D says, I'll communicate my opinion when I want to force it down your throat. And the high C said, why would I have to communicate? I know everything I need to know. But the problem with that is that when it comes to email in today's world, if communication is not important to you, then you want to minimize its impact on you. And the best way to minimize the impact of actual communication, which by the way is what the listener does, you use email. I mean, literally, as I've said 1,000 times in jest before, high C's invented the internet primarily to build a backbone for email, so they wouldn't have to talk to people. Now, is it possible that a person who says I send email updates all the time actually is a good communicator? Definitely. So you'd have to put that together with other things. But when I hear that, I love email, I immediately assume this person is not a good communicator. And then they may prove me wrong, and they may say, and I love it because it's asynchronous and I can do a lot of communicating in a day, and I know who prefers not to have email, who prefers a text, who prefers a phone call, and so on. Okay. After 10 to 20 to 30 interviews, you'll have a good bit of evidence of what candidates say. Hopefully you have notes. And in fact, one way to do that is, if you're not going to do this step where you're giving guidance about the quality of an interview answer, things to look for, words they said, if you're not going to do that, then you might want to consider upping the strength of the interview results capture meeting and to include For instance, if Mike's my boss and I was one of the interviewers, I would say, Mike, I recommend we hire this person, Cassie, for instance. Strong recommendation. Here are the 4 behaviors that you asked me to look at. I found her exceptional in each. Here's an example of a behavior, an example of a behavior, an example of behavior. And then you could even add a 5th one, which is elements around the culture. Or you could do it a little bit differently and you could modify it's actually not a modification, but you could strengthen your guidance on the cultural fit portion, which is already in there, by the way, in the interview results capture meeting, and say, I'll be expecting many more comments about cultural fit in the next 6 months so that we can be developing some frameworks, some boundary conditions for how we're going to evaluate answers against the SWAN, whatever criteria you want to apply. And with something else, I like saying every once in a while to people, yes, we have podcasts on what to do if one of your directs has body odor, but all this stuff is built on principles and theories that are well established and axioms, truths, and so on. And a great example is the way the interview results capture meeting works with behavioral interviews, which works with our interview creation tool. And speaking of the interview creation tool, if you've ever used it, you know something. The interview creation tool is proof that we didn't talk about it much because we thought it was a bridge too far for many years, or we just thought it would muddy the waters. But the purpose of a question is to elicit answers, and it's the answers that make or break things. And so therefore, in the interview creation tool, if we ask a question, we give you the criteria for good and bad answers. And if you've not realized that before, you can look at it with new eyes the next time you see it and say, hey, look, there's things I can be listening for that will help me make a decision about that particular answer.
We've had a lot of new licensees lately. Thank you very much for supporting us.
Yeah.
And if you haven't tried out the interview creation tool, even if you're not interviewing now, go try it. Learn a little bit about what a good interview looks like, and you'll be surprised.
In fact, Mike, if I may, typically we do a pre-roll ad and a mid-roll ad, just because of some timing and some recording. And if you're wondering about our ads, folks, if you think, well, I don't hear any ads, that's because we only do ads for ourselves. We don't take third-party ads. We tried that and hated it. How about I insert what amounts to an advertisement now, but it will maybe not come across that way.
Okay.
And make a case for licensing. Folks, if you don't know, when we started Manager Tools, Mike and I, the goal, it was Mike's idea to do the podcast. I said, sure, what's a podcast?
Yeah, he said, yes. That's how yes, great. What is it?
Yeah. And actually, Mike's analysis of that is one of the 10 or 15 most important ideas that have framed what Manager Tools has meant to so many of you, in that we had been trying to do some things on the web, but I kept complaining, as high eyes are wont to do, because writing on the web, answering questions on the web is just really, really hard. And by the way, I was running my own company at the time. And Mike figured out I'm really good talking about management. And so the medium met the message at podcasts. But you should know, the idea behind the podcast was that after 15 years of running my own company and traveling around to various clients all over the world, including Mike as a client, I didn't love that life. I liked it a lot, but there were parts of it I didn't love, like being away from home. And so we decided, and one of the problems is the only way you could get guidance like this before the podcast was you had to work at a company that could afford us. And consulting firms aren't cheap. We weren't expensive like McKinsey or BCG or Bain, but we weren't cheap either. And it's hard to get noticed. I mean, even if you're within the reach of a mid or small company, there are not natural advertising vehicles, and advertising is expensive. And we've always been, I was before, Mike was before, we are now more so together, frugal when it comes to expenses. If you don't spend it, you don't have to make it. So when we had corporate clients, we were focused on the organization, but we told them, look, just want to be clear to you. you're the customer, but the road to what you want is through these individual managers. All of our guidance is for individual managers. Yes, we have a package around it because you're the one that has to buy it. But let's be clear, unless you tell us you're going to measure us based on organizational outcomes and we have some input on that and so on, the thing you've got to measure is behavior change among the managers. And if you don't believe behavior change among managers will lead to organizational outcome change, you ought not to be spending organizational dollars on doing this, right? Unless you think it's just a retention move. I want my folks to feel like we've trained them. So our guidance, the Trinity and a bunch more, was for individual managers. And Mike and I saw the potential that we ought to give this to individual managers. We really didn't want corporate business, although thank you, Eldon Schaefer, for the 100th time. Nor did we really think we were going to do conferences, public conferences. Actually, it was finally when Mike said, we need to make more money. I said, okay, we'll do a conference. And I wrote out the agenda, I think, at your house, Mike, on a couple of pieces of paper.
In about 3 minutes. I said, really? We could do that?
Yeah, we could do that. Yeah, we could make $100,000 doing that. And that was the beginning of the conference business.
It's kind of like our logo on the back of a napkin.
Exactly. So my point in this long-winded story is to tell you that if you're an individual listener, you are the heart of the Manager Tools community. And the product we intended most to be tailored to you are our licenses. You should know that because of COVID, 2/3 of our business model has been destroyed, right? And we're down to 1/3. And the third that's important right now is our licenses. For $200 a year, you get access to all of our show notes. Now, they are available only online. You have to log in order to look at them. That's for some IP protections that we have been dealing with for the last 15 years because our stuff's pretty good and people like to steal it. But we want you to become a licensee. And because we just had our 15th anniversary here in 2020, if you become a licensee now, you not only get the license, which gives you access to Roadmap in the app, which gives you, and on the web, and gives you access to all the show notes. You also get our interviewing series, which is, I think, over 50 or 60 podcasts now that will tell you everything you need to know, chapter and verse, beyond belief, about how to be interviewed. And in the next 5 years, between 2020 and 2025, there's going to be a lot of froth in the hiring market and the talent market. And it's actually kind of good to have the interview creation tool, which is also part of your license, and the interviewing series so that you can learn how to play both sides of the game, which why wouldn't you? That would make you better on both sides of the game. So if you're not already a licensee, and if you're a listener, now would be a good time for you to become a licensee. It's $200. It's for a whole year, and we guarantee you'll be satisfied or you get your money back.
No questions asked.
Yeah, none. Now we got to go to the last step, right?
Yeah. It's not enough for people to take notes.
And
like you got to share the results. You got to talk about it. You got to make a decision. Somebody's got to make a decision.
Horstman's Law of Organizational Communications. Say something 7 times and half of your people will tell you they've heard it once. Okay? The reverse of that is true. We call it the green tail story. If one person tells you you have a green tail, they're an idiot. When 2 people tell you have a green tail, it's a conspiracy. When 7 people tell you you have a green tail, you turn around and look. You have got folks, and I started out this cast talking about the importance of executive, that this is really one of those bridge casts between managers and executives, and it will go in executive tools. But this capturing of your results and communicating those results and marketing those results internally, don't go too far on that. You don't need glossy stuff. This step, so many junior executives forget. I talked about this the other day in our M conference call, Mike, about the difference between choosing and deciding. Executives don't get to choose. You don't get to say, I want A and not B. That's not enough. That's not a decision. In the professional world, a decision is a choice and a plan for implementation. And executives are not people who sit around making choices, this, that, this, no, this, not that, let's go back, and so on. That's not the executive life, guys. Executives choose and then create plans for implementation, and then also learn to deal with compromise. You don't just get to sit around choosing, which, by the way, you'd get bad at after a while, because learning about implementation makes you a better chooser, which then therefore makes you a better decider, deciding, including the implementing. But people just forget it. And I see managers forget it. They make a decision and they don't communicate. They don't push. They don't push. They don't push. They don't remind. They don't remind. They don't remind. And you know how much you'll know? How much it takes? How much communication it takes? How many reminders? How many pushes? How many fresh mentions and so on of an idea? Until your people tell you they're sick of it. That's the only way you know. Enough, boss. Enough. We've heard. We know. And then they repeat your slogan with a little bit of lilt to it. Yeah, 7 people. Da, ba, la, 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 la. Yeah. Okay, good. You got it. Okay, now I'll move on to something else because change happens fast. So communication, or put differently, it's not enough to have the idea, guys. It's not enough to create the strategies. It's not enough to create the principles. It's not enough to create the questions. Communication and measurement of results of stuff like this, communicating it so that people will do it, and then capturing and protecting the results, analyzing them and so on. That's what makes things like this actually work. Okay. Too often we get glossy stuff from somebody sitting on a throne somewhere saying, look at the decision I made. Yeah. And we don't care. If your hands aren't getting dirty, bub, you're not really into it. You're not part of the solution. You're part of the autocracy, the self-appointed autocracy. If you don't follow up with communications, if you don't create measures, you don't create reporting, your effort will gradually fade into the background, and you will be one of those people that will be aiding and abetting the flavor of the month crowd in your organization. You try it, but it didn't really work. And so your people are like, well, that was actually kind of a good idea. I'd kind of like to learn a little bit more about what the VP, what she's thinking about, what we want to do. And then, but yeah, nothing really came of it. And then suddenly they do that 4 or 5 times. And the next time they say, yeah, no, that boy cries wolf all the time. And they really excited about getting up in front and doing a rah-rah speech at a town hall. But none of this stuff ever comes to fruition in a real specific way. So yeah, no, we're not all in on that.
No results, right? All fire, no results.
Well, we'll do compliance, but yeah, but not commitment. You don't need glossy stuff. Yeah, maybe you can afford it, and the communications office loves doing it. Although I will tell you, I've been in many of those meetings where we were doing an initiative for a big company, and the communications office says, it would sound better if you said this. I said, yes, but that's not the idea. And they would say, but yeah, this is kind of boring. I said, I would say, much to the chagrin sometime of my executive clients, that you really don't know what you're talking about, and you can't change the idea just to make it more palatable, because that makes it not the idea. And then I'd say something like, I thought you were supposed to take our ideas and make them sing and dance and not change the ideas. Is that not your job? My boss would just roll his eyes like, dude, don't piss them off. We need them. So, but on the other hand, you do need some coverage of this initiative in your all hands, in your town halls, in your one-on-ones. And I'm amazed at how many managers, when I tell them, you can use one-on-ones for reinforcement. Now, look, as a general rule, if you want to waterfall something, if Mike's my boss, and Kate works for me, Mike could use his one-on-one with me to tell me about something. And then I would then probably tell Kate about that. Now, that's an inefficient way to do things, because Mike has, in this scenario, other directs, and he has to tell each one of them. We all end up asking the same questions, and it takes Mike way longer to get the message out to everybody. It's better to communicate in a staff meeting. It's better to do that in a town hall. It's better to do that in an all hands. It's better to do that at a stand-up, for instance, okay, where you have multiple people and you only have to share it one time and everybody hears everybody else's questions. But that doesn't mean you can't use it. You can't use one-on-ones. And when I tell people this, they're surprised. If you're going to use a one-on-one to do that, and let's say you're 5 layers up from the bottom of the organization, Mike can tell me, okay, Mark, I want to share something with you about where we're headed on this thing, the Swan project or whatever. And then he would say, and I expect you to cover this in addition to what I'm going to cover in the staff meeting and what I will reinforce again in the town hall coming up in about a month. And I'm going to make it a standard part of my office hours discussion. If somebody pings me and says, hey, you got a minute? Because I've told them between 2 and 2:30 today, I've got office hours. You can't come by because of COVID, but you can just join my Zoom room, and the meeting room, the waiting room will be turned off, so you can come in. If you see somebody already in there, go away until we're done. And I will end my conversation with them by saying, hey, by the way, reminder, we're doing this new Swan thing, blah, 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 blah. Okay. And for the record, guys, if you've not seen it, if you're surprised at the multifaceted, very pronged, variable pronged approach to this, that goes back to say something 7 times and in different ways. And half your people will say they heard it once. And we have a podcast from 10, 12, 14 years ago, out of which came something called a sample communications plan that if you've not seen that document, which is available, now to be clear, you have to sign up for an account, but it's free and you can download it. Most people, when they see that communications plan for the first time, they are literally like, oh my gosh. And then what they actually mean under their voices, I've been doing it wrong. And full disclosure, when I saw that for the first time, I thought, oh my gosh, this is another level. It's so good. It's so smart. It's intuitively obvious to even the most casual of observers. Okay. Now, look, I'm not saying that you can't have slogans. I'm not saying that the communications shop can't make it sound cool. They do that all the time. But what really matters is measures and reporting. And we had a discussion about this in the M Conference speaker series about the difference between measures and reporting. I mean, if a measure isn't reported, you might as well not be measuring it because by definition, measures take time. Don't assume that the query that runs automatically every night and sends an email to people, you might say that doesn't take any time. Actually, it did to create it, but okay, we can have a separate conversation about that once it's running automatically. But the next thing I'll say is if you send me an email, that takes me time. And I have to look at it. And I have to think about it. And then I probably have to talk to somebody else about it. And the time just adds up and eats into things. If we're talking about hiring, and that's what we're talking about here, you've got to communicate the results and you've got to train new managers. Hell, you probably have to train existing managers. You can't just send out new interview creation tool sheets. You probably have to train your directs. It's a 5 or 10 minute conversation. Now, look, if I'm Mike's number 2 and Mike has had this initiative for manager tools with 1,000 employees, he might turn to me and say, Mark, I want you to do a 15-minute bit on the upgrades that we've made, the new questions we've created, the new criteria we've created for those questions. And we'll start when I turn it over to you, you'll say, okay, we're going to talk about how this is going to be implemented. But first, Mark, turn it back to me so I can tell them about Swan. Okay. And then I'll say, okay, that's the key thing that's the idea I want you to have in your head. Now I'm going to give it back to Mike, and Mike's going to tell you what we're actually going to do about that, how we're going to implement it, how interviews are going to change, how interview results capture meetings are going to change, where you can find these new interview creation tool templates so you can get rid of your old ones and download these new ones and so on. That's implementation. That's executive life. You might think that's manager life. It is sometimes, but it's also executive life. It is not enough to come up with the idea. You must push the idea through the organization. And the analogy I have for you about pushing is Sisyphus. Okay. So start pushing and don't be surprised if it doesn't feel great because it's not supposed to. That's why it's Sisyphean.
Yeah. I was just thinking when you said that, well, that's motivational to think that's what you got to do, but that's reality.
It's not motivational, right? But let's be clear. When people say, well, it should be clear mountain streams flowing through lovely Tuolumne meadows
rainbows.
in the Sierra Nevadas. No, it's Sisyphus. You're supposed to
welcome management
being in the muck. It is. I mean, you want excitement going to politics.
There you go.
Now, look, guys, this is more work. But, in the long run, maybe not now, maybe you're not ready to do this yet. Put it in your back pocket, wait until you get a promotion. In the long run, you have to insist on it to combat the entropy inside your organization because everything's always decaying. I say that all the time. If we don't remind our organizations what our principles are, at some point, the principles are forgotten. And you don't realize, but you hire somebody and then you hire somebody else and you tell those two people and then they go, and then one of them leaves and one of them gets promoted to another department. And suddenly the new people don't hear the creation myth. I hate that phrase. We don't have a creation myth. We actually have a story that's true. Everybody else has these creation myths, but you have to tell these stories. You have to educate people. That's the week-long management course. If you don't push, if you don't force it, and by that I mean professionally force, then all you did was create a program. And it's not really what you intended to do, which was a strategic change in the quality of people that are going to populate and lead your organization. That's it. Long-winded on this topic. I love this topic.
Oh, it's powerful, right? I mean, there's some stuff to do here, but if you want to change your organization for the long term, this is the way to do it. Get great people. And it's easy to say get great people. Like, how do you go about doing it? This is how you do it.
Yeah. And I'll say, if you're an executive and you want help with this, reach out, send me a mail. Let's talk about how I can help. I'm happy to do it.
We've helped a few people with this over the years.
Yeah. So look, guys, summarizing, structured, standardized interviews are the core, the bedrock of quality hiring. But if you're going to drive those principles into everyday practice, which you should want to do, it really does, when you get down to it, there's an important step that happens, sort of step 0, which is what kind of people do we want? It takes then figuring out what questions to ask and what to look for in answers. And then you have to communicate it. I mean, this is the life of an executive. It ain't sexy, but it pays the bills. And remember, say it 7 times after people will tell you they heard it once.
There you go. Thanks, my friend. I enjoyed that quite a bit.
My pleasure. I enjoyed that as well. And I got to do an off-the-cuff ad, which I never do. So hooah.
Thanks, my friend.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. We'll see you next week. Have a great one. So long.